Hello, I'm Cheryl McKenzie. Tonight, an APTN Investigates special report. The third season of APTN Investigates actually begins on January 6th, but this is a story we wanted to bring you now. Last summer, reporter Kathleen Martins interviewed former students of residential schools involved in a legal process to get compensation for physical and sexual abuse they experienced in the schools. She discovered there are some problems in the system.
We are sorry.
There, he said it.
To the approximately 80,000 living former students and all family members and communities, the Government of Canada now recognizes that it was wrong.
Prime Minister Stephen Harper accepted responsibility for the government's role in the Indian residential school abuse scandal in 2008.
Far too often, these institutions gave rise to abuse or neglect and were inadequately controlled. And we apologize for failing to protect you.
His apology was one of several ways the government and churches who ran the schools were trying to reconcile with former students. They also coughed up money for compensation, one payment for all students, and additional cash for survivors of sexual and the worst physical abuse. One of those survivors is Annie Plume. She says she was repeatedly physically abused for 10 years at the St. Paul Residential School near her home on the Blood Reserve in southern Alberta. Today, she is in frail health in her 80s, relying on her son Tyrone Weaselhead to translate our questions into her Blackfoot language. Annie is deaf in one ear and lost the use of a finger after her injuries weren't treated.
Every day, her hair getting pulled. She was slammed on the ground, kicked. Her ordeal at St. Paul's was just one scary ordeal for a little 5-year-old girl to go there, and you know, they promised her protection, they promised her education, they promised this, they promised that. I think every one of those promises were broken.
Annie says her parents didn't want her to go, but when the police officers showed up, they had no choice.
They have to. As my dad is going to go to jail if I don't go to school.
Annie says her parents consoled themselves with the belief she was learning and safe, but in reality she was a terrified little girl doing housework in the basement. Children as young as 5, like Annie Plume, were taken from their families and brought here, but not all of them attended classes. Many were forced to be laborers washing bedding in the laundry room. Do you know why you were treated like that?
I don't know why she felt. I wasn't a bad kid at school.
Tyrone says his mother, who raised 7 children alone after her husband died of cancer, was unable to find work due to her injuries and lack of education.
We made you cry. I thought we were going to make her cry.
Oh, because of what she went through, the love she gave us.
He says his mother was anxious yet determined to meet the adjudicator in a room like this one in nearby Cardston, Alberta. It's the adjudicator's job to decide how much compensation Annie deserved. It's her lawyer's job to prepare her for the adjudicator's questions and attend the hearing. That's how the rules are spelled out under the independent assessment process of the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. Survivors get compensated and their lawyers receive 15% of the payout as their fee from the government. And lawyers can negotiate even more pay, up to 15% more directly from their clients. Lawyer Daniel Ish is the chief adjudicator in charge of 110 junior adjudicators across Canada. He also keeps an eye on about 200 lawyers working on compensation cases.
Some lawyers work just for Canada's contribution, right? So they would never take any money from the claimant. Others enter into a contingency fee agreement for an amount more than 15%. The average, the maximum they can do is another 15%. That's by court order. The average is about 20–21% in total. So that's 5 or 6% would come from the claimant.
He says lawyers' fees were capped for a reason.
They wanted to try to make sure that there weren't gross charges being put to clients.
They saw a
obviously.
potential for abuse.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Turns out unethical and even unlawful practices have already occurred. Ish confirms this in an internal memo last June obtained by APTN. He cites lawyers not preparing clients beforehand, not meeting clients until the day of their hearings, not filling out forms correctly, wrongly using third parties, and twice meeting with the wrong clients.
How do you see yourself? Who are you advocating for? Or
Nobody. I'm the neutral. I'm the judge, okay? I'm not advocating for everything. Except around legal fees, I've got more involved in that. The claimant has a responsibility to make out the claim. We have a responsibility to make sure the process operates properly and the rules are applied.
okay.
Tyrone says his mother didn't meet her lawyer until the day of the hearing, and it was a woman instead of the man she had signed with.
Did you have a lawyer?
Well, that lawyer that went to Chippewas.
David Blott. She had David Blott as a lawyer, but there was another lawyer that represented her. It wasn't Blott, David. There was a firm, yeah, probably from the firm.
Tyrone's sister took Annie to meet the adjudicator, but Tyrone says the adjudicator told her she couldn't be the translator, and Annie's lawyer didn't object.
She never even got a chance to explain her story. They just say, no, Annie, that's not applicable or whatever. And so she felt intimidated. She felt like, well, maybe that's what students were supposed to go through.
Annie, did your lawyer help you?
Gres pomognitis I kuiapik.
I don't think so.
Don't think so much.
Help me.
No, I didn't help her at all.
Annie was refused compensation, but her family believes she has grounds to appeal that decision.
After her meeting, they gave, I think, Blott gave us all, they gave us all a letter stating we have a right to interpreter.
APTN Investigates wanted to speak with lawyer David Blott and reached him by phone, but he refused to do an on-camera interview. We went to his Calgary office anyway, and his home. No answer. Daniel Ish says Blott and Company represents 3,000 residential school survivors seeking compensation on the prairies. Many of those clients come from the Blood tribe in southern Alberta, says Chief Charles Weaselhead. He has about 2,500 living residential school survivors in his community of 6,000.
It's a dark history in our past, you know, both for the government, both for the churches, you know, that operated the residential schools on behalf of the government.
Weaselhead had high hopes the court-approved compensation process would help the healing process.
Part of the journey for the majority of us is to really understand, you know, why we are like today. And once we begin to identify, you know, that position, you know, perhaps we can begin to understand why some of us fell into alcoholism, into addictions, you know, have nightmares all the time type of thing, why we are like this to our spouses, to our children, you know, all kinds of patterns of behaviors.
He was angry when he heard what happened to his auntie, Annie Plume.
She went in there, they refused a translator to come in with her. They refused some kind of support, you know, person to be with her, whether it was one of her children or one of a person that she trusts, you know, that she would be in there with, you know. So I'm assuming, you know, that when the process of telling her story began, that she just completely locked up, clamped up.
It wasn't the first time Weaselhead heard about screw-ups. He wrote to Daniel Ish and Assembly of First Nations National Chief Sean Atleo months earlier, saying the effect of the possibility of mishandling of these applications is twofold. First, individual claimants may not be receiving the financial compensation to which they are entitled. Second, claimants, many of whom suffer from disadvantages, are not being heard in the assessment process, and there is thus no real healing for them through the IAP. Weaselhead went further when he sat down with APTN Investigates.
It leads you to believe, you know, that that perhaps a certain firm has stockpiled as too many clients as well.
When we return from the break, we'll show you more about how the IAP is working and who's involved with it. Once a survivor of sexual or physical abuse at residential school is awarded compensation by the federal government, there's a lot of things that can happen to that money. Here's APTN Investigates Kathleen Martins with more.
I counted. I never actually counted all of the signatures. I would assume hundreds. I'll show you in a second. It's gross.
Form filler Kelly Bush shows the paperwork involved in filing a compensation claim for serious abuse suffered at Indian Residential School. Survivors are eligible for up to $500,000 for physical and sexual abuse, but that is the exception. The average payment is about $105,000. Kelly worked for a company in Alberta called Honor Walk. She says it paid her to find survivors in Saskatchewan and complete their compensation forms. Under the guidelines, survivors and law firms can use third parties to complete the forms, but the fee can't be taken off the compensation payment before survivors get it. Honor Walk describes itself as a for-profit company. It claims it's Canada's largest Indian residential school consulting and form-filling firm. It says it's helped 3,000 people with their compensation forms since 2006. Honor Walk also says it doesn't charge for its services and claims to be more knowledgeable in the compensation field than even the Canadian government. But Kelly has a document that says survivors' lawyers will collect $4,000 on Honor Walk's behalf. Kelly says form fillers were paid $125 per application and pushed to complete at least 40 forms per month. So you were being paid $125 for something they were getting $4,000 for?
I would assume, I'm not sure because in here it says $4,000 for the document collection fee. So maybe they were receiving more.
The fee is listed in a slew of documents form fillers had survivors sign, but Kelly's not sure survivors knew what they were paying for.
It took me about 2 months to realize that maybe people's literacy skills were very limited because of the abuses that they suffered in school. How can people learn when they're being tortured every day?
Kelly became the manager of Honor Walk's Saskatoon office in 2009 after answering an ad like this one in a community newspaper. At its height, she says Honor Walk claimed to have 2,500 form fillers working in Western Canada. Kelly says form fillers were pushed to record intimate details of survivors' abuse because the bosses were very specific about how claims should be completed.
We basically were pressured to try and find the highest level of abuse at all times.
And what would Honor Walk do with all of those completed forms?
When I asked that question, I was told to stop thinking too much. I really got told that lots.
Kelly discovered Honor Walk had a relationship with Blott & Company. Among the forms survivors signed was a contingency fee and retainer agreement for lawyer David Blott and his associates.
That's Honor Walk. That's Blott & Company.
Form filler Kelly Bush says she rented office space here for David Blott & Company. She says she picked it because it's right around the corner from homeless shelters where a lot of residential school survivors stay. She says the adjudicators would come here, meet the survivors, and hold the compensation hearings. Kelly says she was in constant touch with her bosses at Honor Walk head office in Bragg Creek, Alberta, and this satellite office in Cardston, Alberta, near the Blood Reserve. We wanted to speak with Honor Walk President Tom Denom, but when we called, we were told he was out of the country. We looked for him anyway in Bragg Creek, where he lives. People there told us the business operates through a box number at the local post office. One person who did meet Tom Denom is residential school survivor Doris Bird. She says he appeared at her home on the Blood Reserve wanting to fill out her compensation claim.
So he wrote everything down and he said, well, I'll be back and we'll come back. He never did come back.
Doris says she told Denom about being sexually assaulted at residential school. She says he never explained who he worked for, but documents show she became a client of David Blott.
I really never really did meet David Blott. I just go to that Western Union. He'd give us directions where to pick up the money. And
the money was 3 personal loans in advance of her compensation payment. Doris says they were arranged by David Blott after she called the Honor Walk office in Cardston. An invoice from Blott and Company shows Doris was charged 22% interest on the loans. It was taken off her compensation payment by the law firm, which receives the money from the government in trust for the client. Doris says she also paid for a big screen TV she was offered for her grandson, who was dying of cancer in a Calgary hospital.
During that time, I went outside and I was sitting in my vehicle, and I knew that there was something wrong. I kept telling my daughter, tell that guy for some receipts, but he never did bring any.
Doris's compensation check came to $27,000. She had been expecting more than $100,000. She says she was asked to keep the amount a secret.
When I got this check that day, they told me that I can't say anything about it. I can't tell anybody that. I can't ever talk about it to anybody. I had to sign that paper stating that I would never say anything about it. I was thinking to myself, why would they say that? There's something going on.
Doris says the stress of the ordeal affected her health.
I did get sick. I had a mild heart attack because of that. When I lost my grandson and what happened.
Doris's chief, Charles Weaselhead, believes people were taken advantage of while waiting, sometimes 2 and 3 years, for the big payouts their lawyers promised.
Advance money is being given to them at a high percentage rate, and stuff like that. So by the time the check arrives, they've either taken all of the advance by this time, being charged a high interest rate, whether some loan agreement has been made or not.
When you heard that, how did you feel?
Well, definitely. I think there's just another form of control, mismanagement. When a firm is taking advantage of an individual that perhaps does not know his rights, that perhaps does not know to speak up and say, you're charging me too much, they clam up, they don't say anything like that, and the firms are charging them a price, way beyond what should happen,
Weaselhead would like to see compensation cases reviewed, and he questions whether everyone involved in the process is doing his or her job.
You received, you said, a general response from the chief adjudicator and from the national chief. Was that satisfactory to you?
No, at this point in time, nothing seems to be moving forward, and I've raised a red flag, to people responsible for that, But in my view, there are certain people responsible for ensuring, that all individuals going through this process are heard, that the hearing is fair.
Fair? And how about credible? Celeste Barassa has serious concerns about the accuracy of compensation applications she collected for Honor Walk.
Once we fill out our forms the way we're supposed to, the way we're told to, and we hand them off to somebody else, we don't know what happens to those forms.
Barassa and her boyfriend say they worked as form fillers for Honor Walk. They say they traveled to reserves in Saskatchewan in search of survivors. Celeste says she was asked to adjust the abuse details to suit the lawyers. Generally, survivors who suffered the worst abuse are entitled to the most compensation. Adjudicators add up the amount based on a point system for levels of abuse.
That was the one thing that really, really bothered me, was the aggravating factors. Well, it bothered Kelly too. When we first started, it was like we're supposed to check off everything, all of them, whether they happened or not. Then all of a sudden we got an email from the lawyers saying, no, you're supposed to only check off these 5 main aggravating factors, even if the other ones were there or not. It's irrelevant. It's like...
Many lives have been disrupted or even destroyed by the residential school's legacy, but the apology, the compensation, and a chance to be heard are very important to the survivors as they try to heal and move on. We'll have more on that after the break. It's not easy to tell strangers about being sexually or physically abused, but that's what IAP claimants have to do. They need support. As Kathleen Martins reports, many of the people we interviewed did not get it.
This is St. Paul's Indian Residential School. It's one of 2 former residential schools on the Blood Reserve in southern Alberta. People live here in apartments now, but it's the place Annie, Doris, and other survivors we spoke with say ruined their childhoods. A fact acknowledged during the Prime Minister's apology.
Physical and sexual abuse and neglect of helpless children, and their separation from powerless families and communities.
Aaron Tallow says his time at residential school also ruined what was left of his life. He was 6, he says, when he was forced to live at St. Paul's. He says he endured sexual assaults and repeated physical abuse from a school supervisor.
So I know you don't want to talk about what happened to you, but what has been the effect on your life of that abuse?
To not think about it, to be alone. I don't trust anybody, even with my own ex-wife, I had to be alone.
Another side effect acknowledged by the Prime Minister.
Residential schools has contributed to social problems that continue to exist in many communities today.
What would you have liked to do with your life?
Stay sober, be a grandfather, continue with my life.
Aaron stayed sober the night before our interview, but he says he was drunk through most of his compensation process. He remembers Tom Denom filled out his compensation form, and that he then became a client of David Blott's. A lawyer Aaron says made him feel embarrassed in this crowded Cardston restaurant.
I started saying that this is how much you're going to get. And there's a bunch of people behind. We were facing out the window, started talking. And I was drunk, my son kept looking around towards the back. I said, oh, people's a bunch of there. It's making a big scene.
Aaron says Blott met him at this Cardston hotel for his compensation hearing.
Said 240,000. When I went down there to sign those papers, he said, you're gonna get 130,000. I didn't care.
You didn't care?
No.
Why not?
Because at the time I was drinking.
Okay.
But he says social workers on the reserve became alarmed at the amount taken off and talked about going to the police. Aaron doesn't know if they did, but he says he was never interviewed. Part of the compensation payout gives survivors money for aftercare treatment. Aaron says he wasn't aware of that, but admits to going on a drinking binge after telling the adjudicator about his abuse. Officials overseeing the compensation process say they are aware of the trauma involved. They also know survivors are not typical clients.
Like in a courtroom, a lawyer on the other side would say, well, you said, you know, here, and now you're saying this. Which is a lie, you know, you see it, and that happens in court. An adjudicator would never do that. They'd say, well, you know, early this morning you said this, and this afternoon you said this. Can you explain how the two fit together?
Who is it who's supposed to oversee clients' rights when it comes to dealing with their lawyers? Is it you?
No.
Okay, who is it?
The client. Client and the law society, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like survivors were left to navigate the compensation process on their own.
It has taken extraordinary courage for the thousands of survivors that have come forward to speak publicly about the abuse they suffered.
Marie Goodrider says she did what she was supposed to do, complain to the Law Society of Alberta about her lawyer, David Blott. She says she told them he kept her waiting 3 years for her compensation payment, charged her high interest for 3 loans, and sent another lawyer to the actual compensation hearing.
He came up to us saying, okay, everything's going to be okay. We'll look after you. But it didn't even happen. No counseling, nothing. He got his money and he just ran. That's what I felt like.
So did you?
Marie says she received $2,500 and an explanation.
They're building up, telling me I'm going to get this much. He said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to say we had a bad adjudicator. So he turned around and covered himself up. He blamed the government.
Marie says she should have been angry. She still lives with a painful head injury and memories of sexual molestation suffered at residential school. But she wasn't as strong back then and says she was used to the system keeping her down.
And all the nuns said, "Oh, you'll be okay. You'll be okay." Like I wasn't taken to a doctor or nothing. Like I was hurt, but I was scared of what they'll do if I complained. I lived in shame because I always remember being stripped. And my haircut, I always remember that. And I thought, well, why am I trying to respect myself now? It's already been taken away, so I guess it's everybody's now.
Marie says she lived on the street and abused substances for many years. Like Erin, she says she never trusted people again.
Punishing myself for what these people put me through hell, and I have to live it. Yeah. And they're going to come and tell me the government apologized to me. They might as well. When I was sick, stationed at a grave right there and buried me. At least I wouldn't have to live all these years with all that hardship.
Form filler Celeste Barassa says it was people like Marie she worried about while working for Honor Walk.
I'm pretty sure that wasn't their intent, but it feels like we almost re-victimized these people.
Kelly Bush also wants survivors to know she feels bad about what's happened. Bad enough to go against the advice of a criminal lawyer in Saskatoon.
I have been unable to sleep because of the stress, because I'm so concerned for the people. Even though that criminal lawyer told me to not talk about this, I want to talk about it so that something can be done, so that something right can be made from the wrong, because that's what this settlement package was about in the first place, to make something severely wrong acknowledged and to do something good with it.
Again, something the apology and subsequent compensation program was supposed to do.
Therefore, on behalf of the Government of Canada and all Canadians, I stand before you in this chamber so vital, so central to our existence as a country, to apologize to Aboriginal peoples for the role the Government of Canada played in the Indian residential schools system.
Marie says she did not get a response from the Law Society. But she did get something else, she says, her voice.
I chose to speak because this should be brought out in the open, I feel. Not just for my sake, but for the sake of others. And the apology, in my own words, doesn't mean nothing.
APTN Investigates' Kathleen Martins will be back with the final act of our story after the break. Chief Charles Weaselhead has been pushing for someone to do something about the many complaints he's been hearing for a year or more. Others have been trying for even longer. Here's Kathleen Martins with the conclusion of our story.
To signify that the Prime Minister or the inductee will carry out his duties.
Prime Minister Stephen Harper was made an honorary chief of the Blood Tribe in southern Alberta in July.
It is an experience I will never forget.
This special experience came with a personalized title in the Blackfoot language. The Prime Minister was named Chief Speaker, says Chief Charles Weaselhead, because of the residential school apology he issued in 2008.
I know that the Blood Tribe was deeply affected by that system.
The sacred ceremony binds Harper to the tribe, and he is expected to look out for its interests. Weaselhead said Harper, through the apology, set the tone for rebuilding Canada's relationship with Aboriginal peoples. That's why he feels wounded by complaints involving a Calgary law firm and blood survivors seeking redress.
When you begin to hear stories like you say over and over again, you know, then it makes you wonder what's happening. And I suspect that we're not the only ones here in Alberta and the Blood Tribe, that there is a national concern about the way the process has been handled for each individual, you know. So I suspect that you're going to find that more individuals are going to come forward, you know. We don't have a choice but to deal with this issue at hand.
Weaselhead spent 11 years at St. Paul's Residential School, something he says he's still coming to terms with. He knows it's been harder for some.
We've heard stories of people trying to take their own lives. It's because they've been waiting so long to hear something from their lawyers in terms of their application. What have you been hearing about that?
It's a waiting game for them. It creates frustration, anxiety, which may lead to other activities, you know, that they may take their lives, you know.
Adding to the pressure, says Weaselhead, is a deadline. Survivors have until September 2012 to apply for individual compensation. Daniel Ish expects Canada to compensate an estimated 30,000 survivors.
What's it been like for you being part of this process?
It's been a really difficult job for me, you know, because there are so many competing interests. There's lots of money around, obviously. My best guess is we will award more than $2 billion and less than $3 billion by the time it's over. So that's a lot of money out there. And if you just take the average, you know, average legal fees on that, say if it's $2 billion, 20%, there's lots of money out there. And lots of money always brings people with hard lines and so forth.
In total, Ish predicts $5 billion will be spent on administration expenses, lawyers' fees, and compensation payouts. But what the lawyers did to earn those fees, he says, is not his concern.
Our concern is to make sure that those files are handled properly in our process, so that they're going through the stream so that we can get the job done.
Legal experts tell APTN Investigates that lawyers soliciting clients directly or through third parties is problematic, that it is seen as putting the lawyer's financial interests ahead of their clients. But with no compensation ombudsman or appeal process to turn to, former form filler Celeste Barassa believes survivors continue to pay the price.
You're supposed to hear these people's worst, horriblest stories, things that still, like this, the 80-year-old man who still has nightmares, and just walk away from it and never hear from him again. And I don't know if he got his hearing.
An update for you now on some of the people featured in that story. Elder Annie Plume passed away. Her funeral was last week. Aaron Tallow's ex-wife also passed away. APTN Investigates spent 6 months digging into complaints from survivors about their experiences with the IAP compensation process. British Columbia Supreme Court Justice Brenda Brown suspended Blott & Company from contacting clients on October 31st. On November 10th, Justice Brown lifted that suspension, but also ordered an investigation into these matters. That investigation continues. Kelly Bush was asked to turn over her documents to the court monitor last week. She complied. There are more details on this story, and tomorrow you'll be able to look at the documents on our website, www.aptn.ca. Good night.